the sports and amusement. With Halloween behind us, our attention was focused on hockey, which was composed of the Pee-wee, midget, juvenile, junior, and senior teams. As I got into my teens, I played defense along with my best friends, Ross Lomare and Richard Girardi. We were the Catamount AC's athletic clubs, proudly supporting royal blue uniforms trimmed with gold and yellow, which had replaced the dark blue with pale blue striped uniforms of the previous team, the Clippers. Our coach, John Gerlitz, was later followed by Dutch Gaynor, who had played in the NHL. The quality of coaching for such a small hamlet was outstanding. All sports activities in Catamount were sponsored or supported by the Sports and Amusement Association. They docked the mine workers $1.50 a month. Those not working for the coal company would pay their dues at the office. In addition, money was raised by dance proceeds or through hockey pools, which were common. Each weekend, there were 4 or more pools. The pools were based on the Hockey Night in Canada scores, which were broadcast every Saturday night on the radio. It would always be the Maple Leafs or the Canadiens playing against an American team, the Bruins, Red Wings, Rangers, or Blackhawks, sometimes against each other. It would cost 25 cents to enter the pool, and the ones who matched the winning score won about $8. Sports were given a prominent position in our town. The Sports and Amusement Association also made money on the big dances. Dances were held on Christmas Eve, Christmas night, Boxing Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, Easter, and the 1st of July, but Christmas night and the New Year's Eve were the biggest local social events. Remembrance Day dance was always put on by the Legion. My dad, who was really bald, would be at the door collecting the admission fee. When the night was through, his head would be covered with lipstick marks. At that time, lipstick was not kiss-proof. Following the November 11th dance, we waited with great anticipation for the big Christmas dance. There were many weekend dances in between in Catamount, Luscar, or Mountain Park to fill the cold winter nights. As winter crept in, the weather would get a lot colder, and snow would get crisper underfoot. We would spend more time indoors. Some of the boredom was relieved by flipping through the T. Eatons and Simpsons catalogs. Christmas lists were written and revised at least 10 times before Christmas finally arrived, and our presents usually turned out to be totally different from what we requested. The whole process of daydreaming and anticipating the big day was still exciting. The disappointment of not getting what was asked for prepared me for life. Sometimes blessings end up being those things that we would not normally request or desire. They often turn out to be the better things in life. It was approaching the time to be jolly, and we were practicing for school plays and church productions. The Chadwick boy, who sang in the Anglican choir, and I were asked to sing solo parts in Good King Wenceslas. All was going well until my voice started to change. My only option was to drop out of it, as they did not prefer the hymn to be yodeled. At last, it was Christmas Eve. Yes, it was the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. In our home, no, this was not the case. Like many youngsters in our town, Don and I were still awake long past midnight, wanting to catch Santa in action. This massive loss of sleep was caused by a myth perpetrated on the young by conspiring adults. They wanted to keep us under control by threats. Since it was lucrative to play along, I gladly perpetuated this myth. Later, on Christmas Eve, my brother Bill would be playing his trumpet at the dance, while Mum would be stuffing the turkey for the next day. Dad, in the meantime, would be trying to tune in carols and Christmas programs on the radio. This was quite a feat, as sometimes they would come in strong and then fade away. All of this was between bouts of static and screeching. The effort was well rewarded when, by a few short minutes, the clear sound of carols filled our whole humble cabin with a feeling of warmth and well-being. We would finally succumb to sleep and miss that elusive Santa Claus again, but we knew he had come because when we awoke, there was our Christmas stocking, a big one marked Made in Japan. We should have known better with all the clues. When we grew a little older, we did find out it was a myth, but why spoil a good thing? Stocking stuffers were mostly made of paper, as plastics weren't available. There were coloring books, a few wax crayons, some simple, brightly painted wooden boats, Chinese puzzles, tablets, which, when put in the water, expanded to make flowers, and cardboard games with cardboard pieces. The stockings had tin cars that fell apart in no time, and when you opened them, you could see they were made from used Campbell's soup or Money's mushrooms cans. The stockings were a hodgepodge of colorful junk. If particularly lucky, some of the items may have lasted the day. Having slept in, Mom and Dad were now up, and Dad was getting ready to take Don and me to the children's Christmas tree sponsored by the Sports and Amusement Association. After getting our warm clothes on, we would slip into our gumboots and head to the community hall, along with the other town children. This hall was also our dance hall, concert hall, and theater. As we entered the hall, we stared in awe at the big Christmas tree all decorated and lit up in the corner. I bet it was 15 to 18 feet tall. There was so much excitement one could hardly hear above the din, and then all of a sudden the lights would dim and a hush would come over the hall. Amid a great cheer, Porky Pig would appear on the screen, and the fun would begin. After 3 or 4 cartoons, the Three Stooges and the Dead End Kids would be shown. Next was the main event, a western with Tom Mix or Gene Autry. The arrows would be flying and the bullets whizzing. That Gene, what a guy! He would just ride along singing a song, never seemed to have a speck of dust on his outfit. What a shot! He could cut a hangman's rope with a 6-shooter at full gallop. Gene not only lived through the episode, he even won, as always. As the show ended and before the noise could escalate, somebody yelled, "Be quiet! Can you hear the sleigh bells?" By this time we were so hyped, we could hear the reindeer hoofbeats. At this time, I'm sorry to say, we had not heard of Rudolph. At last, the side door opened and in came Santa with his ho-ho-hos. When they assembled his helpers, called out names one by one and asked each child, "Were you a good boy this year?" I would have liked to have answered honestly in the negative, but I was afraid to take the chance, and there were quality presents at stake. Leaving the hall for home, you received a large goodie bag with candies, nuts, an apple, and just a few Japanese oranges. It was a big haul, even by today's standards. As we trudged home, the frost formed on our scarves as we exhaled, and our feet started to feel cold. Somehow this discomfort only increased the enjoyment we felt as we stepped into our warm cabin for the family gathering. The odor of the roasting turkey was so enticing that it made one's mouth water. On these occasions, we had added pleasures of playing in the living room, a place that was usually unheated and off limits to us. It was like a showpiece used only at Thanksgiving, from Christmas to New Year's, at Easter for a period of time in the summer when it didn't have to be heated. We'd kneel in the living room floor and play with the electric train that Dad put around the base of the tree until something else attracted our attention. We would go out with Dad about 5 days before Christmas to select the perfect tree. Some years we had our eyes on a tree for months before Christmas. Other years the tree was harder to pick out than our Christmas wishes. After carrying it home, we had to build a base to make it stand. Commercial tree stands weren't yet available. Mom and Dad would decorate the tree with spring-clip birds and bells, garlands of silver paper and candles. By the time they were finished, it seemed a magnificent sight. When Dawn and I were old enough to help in the decorating process, we made garlands of white and pink popcorn or rings of colored paper. By this time, candles had been replaced by strings of electric lights, which were safer and more practical. And at last dinner was ready. Dot and I would plead for and usually be granted the drumsticks. As with Thanksgiving dinner, we could not manage to find the room for dessert. You ever heard the term, "your eyes were too big for your belly"? Well, that was always the case. With dinner over, Dad and Bill would play the gramophone with the 78 RPM records. There was one section on each side that lasted 2.5 to 3 minutes. After each song, one had to lift the stylus and turn the record over, or put another selection on. Nothing was automatic, and the needle had to be changed every number of plays, as we didn't have diamond-tipped needles in those days. Meanwhile, Dawn and I returned to our newly gotten gains. One year, we would get Tinker Toys or Meccano sets. Another, it would be a wood-burning set or an American logs. We would build forts or cabins with our logs, daydreaming of being cowboys or scouts fighting the Indians. The next moment, I'd be an Indian, Chief, Sitting Wolf, or Geronimo, ready to scalp my first victim, usually my brother. And then we would be blasted back to reality as we heard our mother calling, "Jackie, Donnie, it's time for bed." As the years went on, we were granted the privilege of going to the Christmas night dance. One condition of our attendance was that we had to go to bed for a rest before going to the dance. Mother said no rest, no dance. In spite of our reluctance, we would usually fall asleep. By the time Mom called to wake us up, we'd rather have slept. However, once we were awake, we were excited. A quick wash refreshed us. Hot water was taken from the reservoir at the side of the stove with a dipper and poured into a white enameled pan. If the water was too hot, one could cool it with a dipper of water from the drinking pail. We donned boots, toques, scarves, and mitts. The cook stove was banked up by coal by Dad, and away we would go. In our excitement, we hardly noticed the cold as we trudged off to the hall. As we entered the hall, the big tree and all the decorations were still there, but the seats had to be removed from the center and were lined up down both sides to clear the dance floor. The canvas was removed from the floor, which had to be waxed for the dancers. We youngsters got together with our age and described our booty, exaggerating sometimes if we felt we were being outdone. You know that the band was ready to roll when you heard beep beep, toot toot, dong dong, the instruments being tuned up. It was Jerry Hurst and his Melody Makers. The band played foxtrots, two-steps, polkas, shiatzes, waltzes, and a square dance now and then. During the dances, a number of men would stand in the middle of the dance floor and would tag a passing couple, replacing the lead man, who in turn would go to the center of the floor and possibly tag another couple. There was no tagging during a waltz. The musicians, with their harmony and rhythm, would weave a spell over the twisting, gyrating crowd. Mother and father, along with others, would sit and listen with pleasure and amusement. I thought it was hilarious, in fact, downright silly to see adults bouncing around the floor to music. That was until later, when my hormones kicked in. Seems like in no time at all, the orchestra ceased playing. It was after 1 a.m. and time for refreshments. Seats were pulled out and unfolded, the kitchen serving windows were open, and servers came around with trays of sandwiches, followed by baked sweet goods, my favorites, and then tea and coffee. During one of these breaks, Bill brought Mum a cup of tea and a sandwich. She held the sandwich in one hand and the cup of tea with a spoon in it in the other when Bill went to get her tray. A busybody beside her leaned over and remarked, "You know, lady, you can knock your eye out drinking tea with a spoon and a cup." Mother, being irritated, replied in her Welsh accent, "Yes, and a person doesn't mind her own business can get her eye knocked out too, and it won't be with a spoon." Mother was never slow to speak her mind. After the refreshments were over, the seats were replaced along the sides, the floor was swept, and the dance was ready to resume. And that's when I heard my mother call, "Jackie, Donnie, time to go." Out to the cloakroom to put on our boots, toques, scarves, gloves, and coats. We were ready to go into the cold, cold night. It was not as tolerable going home as it had been coming to the dance. We struggled home to our cozy cabin and into our nice warm beds, courtesy of hot water bottles. As Brother Bill was playing with his orchestra, we boys had the bed to ourselves. Usually the three of us slept in the same bed with Don at the foot. He was always complaining of smelly feet. The next night, the Boxing Day dance was held, but we were only allowed to go to the Christmas and New Year's Eve dances. The New Year's Eve dance had a large net filled with novelties such as hats, balloons, and noisemakers suspended over the high dance floor. At midnight, the band struck up Auld Lang Syne, and the novelties were released from the net to be picked up by the celebrants. I liked the noisemakers the most. Once again, when the refreshments were over and the dance was about to resume, I heard my mother call us, and it was time to go home. Leaving the well-wishers and the resolution makers, we went out into the frigid night. Seeing that many who came just to visit and listen to the music left at the same time, I believe we were about 8 or 9 years old when we went to our first Christmas and New Year's Eve dances. Those who didn't go to the dance could listen to Guy Lombardo ring in the new year on the radio if it wasn't too noisy. Others discharged their rifles or beat pans together. The siren and the mine whistle would also take part.